to pre-wash or not to pre-wash your fabric before sewing? That is one hot topic I see talked about a lot in the sewing community. And if you're a beginner sewer or even a self-taught sewist, you might be a little bit confused as to why you should do this or why not. So let's break it down in this video and talk about why you would actually want to pre-wash your fabric. How important is it, my experience with pre-washing and not pre-washing, and some best practices that you can do so that you can make better decisions for your own sewing. Welcome back, my lovely ladies and gents. It is such a pleasure to see you again today. I do enjoy seeing all your smiling faces, or imagine seeing all your smiling faces behind the camera there. If you are new around here, welcome. My name is Evelyn Wood and I'm a lifelong dressmaker and creator of VintageSewingSchool.com. And around here we do everything vintage sewing skills that you need for our modern day sewing. So if it sounds like something that you're interested in, say you're just new to sewing, you definitely would like to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any future videos, because I think you'll find a lot around here to really help your sewing. So one of the things that you hear, you might have heard before, is should you pre-wash your fabric? What does this even mean? It's a really hot topic, and some people do, some people don't. There's a lot of, people do all sorts of different things. So let's break this down and actually talk about what is pre-washing your fabric, why you would want to do it, my experience, and some best practices to really kind of just help you make better decisions on whatever it is that you're sewing to get you by. And so first up, let's just talk what is pre-washing the fabric. So pre-washing your fabric means that you would wash your fabric first and then dry it, iron it, get it all nice and neat and new before you cut out your pattern pieces and before you sew it all together. So that is what you call pre-washing. So what are the main reasons why you would actually do this? Because it takes a lot of time and there has to be a good reason why you would want to do this. So there are many, and we'll talk about then what you should perhaps do or not do at the end, but let's walk through what are the reasons why pre-washing, why you would even do this. First up is cleaning. So if you're like me and you do actually buy a lot of secondhand or thrifted fabrics, then as you might imagine, cleaning, because what pre-washing for cleaning is paramount. Now, even if you buy new fabrics at the store, cleaning is still necessary. So quite often fabrics are treated with different chemicals and dyes, of course. The chemicals a lot wash off on the first wash. I know a lot of people, I've heard a lot of stories about people being quite sensitive to the chemicals that are on unwashed fabrics. I've never had that experience myself, but I have heard a number of stories. So it's good idea sometimes to wash it to get rid of those chemical residue and any excess dye runoff. So I put all of that into the cleaning category for hygiene, cleanliness, get out the dirt and the grime, for dye runoff, and to get rid of any excess chemicals and treatment processes that might be sitting on the surface of the fabric, because you want all these gone before you actually sew up your garment. The next reason why you would want to actually pre-wash your fabric is probably the most talked about one, and that is for shrinkage. So believe it or not, fabric can shrink. Depends on the fabric. Well, actually, it mostly depends on the fiber on which the fabric is made from as to how much it will shrink. So a lot of fabrics we buy these days are actually pre-shrunk. So they have, in their dyeing process, pre-shrunk, pre-washed, I guess is what they do. So in the dyeing processes, they are actually washed out already and are pre-washed and have that shrinkage already happen. So from memory, a lot of fabrics, industry standard is up to about 5% shrinkage is quite normal. So it could shrink about 5% after you wash it. Now, this is going to depend on all different types of fabrics. As I said, a lot of, mostly your natural fibers are more prone to shrinkage. Things like wool is huge one, as you might be aware of, can shrink a lot. Rayon is quite susceptible to shrinkage, and cotton can be too, but most cottons I think are already pre-shrunk from the roll. Another reason that you might be wanting to pre-wash your fabric is to true the grain of the fabric. So sometimes during manufacturing, a lot of the yarns in here can get twisted and warped, and maybe it's just been stretched in time, something's happened to it, who knows. But a lot of the fibers can be sort of twisted and warped around, and it can actually put the grain line out of whack a little bit. And so by washing your fabric, it obviously loosens up all of the fibers and the yarns in there, and it will set it back into its sort of natural position where it will be after you wash your garment anyway. And so that's kind of what we're aiming for, is to make and settle all the yarns down into where they will be once you wash your garment when it's made up, because you don't want it to change after you've made it all up, because things might twist and warp and not be there. So to true your fabric, sometimes pre-washing can help, because then it's all set back before you cut out your pattern pieces on your fabric, and it can help set back that grain line into place if it is skewed. Doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. If you're a little bit confused as to what the grain line is, I have actually made this video here on what the grain line is, how to find it, and a bit more information, particularly if you're very new to sewing. Understanding and knowing the grain line is way, way up there, high on the list. So I definitely recommend at least go watch that video to give you a little bit more information on what that is. So why are these things a problem? So if we don't pre-wash and maybe one of these things happen, what is it a problem? Like what could happen? Well, we'll talk mostly about shrinkage, because obviously being clean is pretty obvious, and the grain line is sort of obvious. Most comes down to the shrinkage and dye run. So the first one is the shrinkage. So you don't want to make up a garment and then wash it and then find that it shrinks and it doesn't fit you. So I've heard a lot of stories of this happening, of different people that this has happened. So it can happen that a garment will shrink upon washing, and all of your hard work, oh, that's heartbreaking to have that happen. And the other reason is you might be using two different types of fabrics, and they might be getting sewn together, say, and maybe one shrinks and the other one doesn't, but you put them together, so you don't pre-wash, you sew them together, and then once your garment's made, then you wash it. Then you find out that one shrinks and one doesn't. This one will be all sort of shrunken in, and your seam will be all puckered and bubbly because this one stayed the same, but this one has shrunk. That's not good. You don't want that. Perhaps the dye on this one maybe runs, and then it runs all over this other one. You also don't want that. So when you're sewing two different types of fabrics together, because it just kind of compounds the risk into two, so to say, of those things happening. So another reason might be when you're using fusible interfacings and facings together. So if you don't pre-shrink and you've got a fabric that is going to shrink a little bit, think about a facing piece. If you're then ironing on your facing and then it shrinks a little bit, you get all of this like bubbling and puckering because your interfacing has stayed the same, but the one, like your fabric under it, is kind of like shrunk up under it, and then it all gets bubbly and puckery and it looks terrible. Basically, you know, if it's quite bad, you just have to throw it away and start again. So that can happen. That I'm sure that has actually happened to me at points as well with the interfacing pieces and places like that. And I guess the big question really is, how much of a problem is it? So I hear, and what is my experience perhaps with pre-washing, not pre-washing, and shrinkage of fabrics? So this is where it does get divided. Some people will religiously pre-wash and others don't. And there is no right answer. Of course, it's up to you. So this is what this video is about, to give you more options, to be more informed so you can make better choices for what your sewing is in front of you. So what is my experience? Well, I have to say I haven't really had any terrible experiences with fabric shrinkage. And I've been sewing a long time. So I've never made up a garment and it has shrunk on me and never fit. I have at times used interfacings and found them bubbling up little bits, but I have some tips on for you to how to avoid those types of things in the best practices coming up. So my practice, what I do in the past, I never really pre-washed my fabric. I have to admit, I never did. When I used to buy a lot more fabric than I do now, straight from the shops. You know, I thought they were quite clean and whatever have you. And a lot of them are actually pre-washed and pre-shrunk. And I've never found that I had a problem. These days, my practice is to pre-wash all of my fabrics because mostly I buy second-hand and thrifted fabrics. And vintage, so I want to make sure that they are super clean and over time that all the shrinkage does happen and that all will take place. And I definitely want it all pre-washed because I want my fabric to be perfect as my garment will be after it's made up. So my practice is to pre-wash all of my fabrics now, and I do it all before they go into my stash. But as I admitted, I didn't in the past pre-wash quite a lot, and I never really had a problem. But trust me, I've heard a lot of horror stories of people making up garments and then they've put them in the wash and then they've shrunk and it's been a nightmare. So there's no correct answer or something that always happens all of the time. That's not the case. Let's talk about a few best practices that you can do to actually mitigate the chances of all of this happening. But first, if you are really kind of vibing this content and you're really enjoying going deep on subjects like this and really learning and understanding why it is what you're doing, the things that we do in sewing, I would invite you to come have a look at vintagesewingschool.com. It is my online sewing school where we go really, really deep on topics like this and it's all about understanding our dressmaking skills and our sewing skills to make you be able to create anything that you want. So it's vintagesewingschool.com. I have some free classes there for you to try too. I would love to have you in class. So let's talk about what are the best practices we can do to try and, help solve this problem and not run into any problems, I should say. One of the best things that you can do is actually just create a really good habit in which you just pre-wash all of your fabric as it comes into your sewing room, or I should actually say before it hits your sewing room. Pre-wash it before it goes into your stash and just make that a habit. Yeah. If you like the idea of habits, good sewing habits to have, I have actually made this video before about good sewing habits that I think you'll really enjoy too, to go watch after this one, of course. Maybe you have a huge roll of wool that is really quite bulky and might not even fit into your actual washing machine. You have to go to a laundromat or something with a huge big washing machine that'll fit your 5 meters of wool in there or something. Yeah, I can understand why you definitely don't want to just pre-wash that if you don't have to. So in that case, test. Yeah, so all you need to do is to get a bit of fabric and mark in a length. Do make it fairly decent length, because if it's too small, the margin of error will be millimeters and you'll not be sure whether it has actually shrunk or not. So do make it at least, a good little bit of length here. I recommend putting tailor's tacks, so just a few stitches with some thread, because markers and pens and things like that will wash out. So mark in a line here and here, write down what measurement that is between those marks, throw it in the wash. When it's dry, iron it back out, and before you iron it, measure it, and then iron it and steam it, and then measure it again and see if it has shrunk. So just test it, and then you can decide whether it's acceptable or not acceptable amount of shrinkage. So another thing to consider is the size of your garment. So if you think of a 5% shrinkage, like I talked about, as an industry acceptable standard a lot of the time, that's 5 centimeters over a whole meter. That's a lot. I've never had that happen. But think about it. If it's 1 centimeter, if it shrinks 1 centimeter, would that make a difference on your garment? So the looser fit the garments are, you're not going to notice that little bit of shrinkage that might occur. However, if you've got a very, very tight fitting garment or a corset, something like that, think about that. every single millimeter counts, in which case, if you're doing a corset, you absolutely want to pre-wash your fabric because every millimeter counts. Tight fitting bodice, you need to consider if it does get just 1 centimeter smaller, will that be too tight to fit? So the size of the garment makes a difference as to how much tolerance you'll have for leeway to maybe get away with not pre-washing or needing to pre-wash. And the last one is a little tricky technique that I learned way back in fashion college, and that is to pre-shrink your pieces at the iron with your steam iron. So to pre-shrink, you need the heat and the steam and the water. That actually is enough to pre-shrink pretty much most of your fabrics. I mean, I wouldn't probably do that for wool or something that you think is really going to shrink, but just sort of as you're pretty sure it's not going to shrink and you're just going to do your best practices to make sure it doesn't, is to just steam it. You need a good steam iron to do this. But just when you have your facing pieces, for example, you would steam, put heaps of steam all over them first before, let it cool a little bit, and then I actually like to move it around a bit as well, like fluff it around so that all the fibers can move back into place where they want to be, and then put your fusible interfacing on top. Yeah. And then, so of course you would want to do that same thing to the area that piece is going to go onto. Yeah? You can see where I'm going with that. So you can kind of pre-shrink your pieces at the iron. You just need heaps of steam. You kind of need a nice steam iron to really get enough steam to do this properly. But just doing, and particularly those high areas that will matter the most, where you've got fusible interfacings, you don't want that to fuse and knot, you don't want one to shrink and the other, where you've got two bits sewn together. So using that pre-shrinking at the iron is something that I definitely use to mitigate my problems of having garments shrink on me. And I guess since I've never really had a problem with garments shrinking on me, perhaps those things have served me well in doing those. That has worked out for me. Well, my friends, where do you sit on the line of a pre-wash or not pre-wash? What do you do? Pre-washer or not pre-washer? Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle like me. I'd love to hear your comments down below, and if you have any stories that you would like to share with us, please leave those too. And make sure you go down and read them all, because there'll be a few little gems down there, I am sure. Now, do like this video if you like it, and do check the description box down below, because I've left some links there for you for other videos that I think you'll really enjoy. And well, until next time, happy sewing. Bye.